The Grand Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with voices from 100 different species. Tall, short, scaled, feathered, all the greatest minds in the known universe gathered in one place. They came for the same reason they had for the past 50 years, to face the problem that had stumped them all. In the center of the room floated a hologram. It twisted and turned, showing complex equations that seemed to break and reform. This was the quantum entanglement paradox, the one puzzle that stood between all intelligent life and the stars beyond. Elder Gray, the oldest member of the council, tapped his long fingers on the table. His skin had the color and texture of old paper, and his 6 eyes blinked in different patterns as he spoke. "Another year, another failure," he said to Admiral Stone, who sat beside him. "I'm beginning to think this problem has no answer." Admiral Stone, a being made mostly of crystalline structures that caught the light, turned to face Elder Gray. "Every problem has an answer. We just haven't found the right mind to solve it yet." The paradox, as most called it, prevented faster-than-light travel. Without solving it, each species remained trapped in their own small corner of the galaxy. Trade was limited. Knowledge spread slowly. Many worlds never met their neighbors at all. "The reward stands at 10 billion universal credits," announced Elder Gray to the hall, "plus exclusive rights to the technology for 5 years. Who will present their solution first?" A tall being with blue skin and 4 arms stepped forward. Professor Zeta of the Corvid mathematicians was famous for solving 3 other impossible problems in the past decade. "My team has worked for 3 years on this approach," said Professor Zeta, bringing up a new set of equations. The crowd leaned forward. Hope filled the air. For 2 hours, Professor Zeta explained the work. The mathematics grew more complex. The hologram twisted into shapes that hurt the eyes. And then, at the final step, the equations collapsed. "No!" shouted Professor Zeta, frantically trying to fix the error. But it was too late. Like all attempts before, it failed at the same point. Elder Gray sighed. "Thank you for your effort, Professor. Who is next?" One by one, the greatest minds in the galaxy presented their work. One by one, they failed. Some came closer than others, but none could solve the central problem. "This is the 51st Annual Problem-Solving Summit," said Admiral Stone as the day ended. "Perhaps next year will bring success." Just then, a small commotion broke out near the entrance. A group of beings entered the hall, shorter than most, with only 2 arms and 2 legs, and soft skin in various shades of brown and pink. "Ah," said Elder Gray, "the humans have arrived." Humans were new to the galactic community. Their planet, Earth, had been discovered just 3 years ago. They were still learning the ways of space travel and alien cultures. Dr. Reed led the human delegation. He was tall for his species, with gray in his hair and glasses perched on his nose. Behind him walked 5 other scientists, all carrying data pads and looking nervous. "We apologize for our late arrival," said Dr. Reed with a small bow. "Our ship encountered some difficulties." "You have missed today's presentations," said Elder Gray. "But you are welcome to observe tomorrow's sessions." What no one noticed was the small figure half hidden behind Dr. Reed. Unlike the other humans, this one was much younger, a child, by human standards. Her name was Lisa, and she was Dr. Reed's daughter. At 12 years old, she had no business being at the Galactic Summit, but a childcare emergency had left Dr. Reed with no choice but to bring her along. Lisa's eyes were wide as she took in the strange beings and the floating hologram. Unlike the adults who saw an impossible problem, she saw something beautiful and interesting, a puzzle waiting to be solved. Little did anyone know that the greatest minds in the galaxy had already failed, but one human child would soon crack the impossible. The next morning, Dr. Reed gave Lisa strict instructions. "Stay in our guest quarters. Don't wander off. Don't touch anything. And most importantly, don't bother anyone." He handed her a tablet with educational games. "The council doesn't know I brought you. If they find out, Earth might lose its place here. Lisa nodded seriously. I promise, Dad. But as soon as Dr. Reed left for the main hall, Lisa grew bored. The games were too simple. The walls of their room were plain and white. And somewhere in this huge building, the most interesting puzzle in the galaxy waited. I'll just take a quick look, she told herself. I won't bother anyone. She slipped out into the hallway. The building was enormous, with high ceilings and strange plants growing along the walls. Lisa followed the sound of voices until she found herself in a large open area. Beings of all shapes and sizes walked about, talking in groups or working at what looked like computer stations. No one paid attention to the small human girl. Most had never seen a human child before and assumed she was some kind of assistant, or perhaps a small adult from a different species. Lisa spotted an empty terminal in the corner. The screen glowed with the same twisting pattern she had seen in the main hall. Curious, she sat down in front of it. The chair adjusted itself to her height. The screen flashed words in a language she didn't understand, then switched to English. Welcome, delegate. Please identify. I'm Lisa, she said simply. Voice pattern recognized as human. Access granted to basic data. Suddenly, the screen filled with equations and diagrams. Lisa didn't understand most of the symbols, but she recognized patterns in them. They reminded her of the string games she played with her friends back on Earth. Cat's Cradle and Jacob's Ladder. For over an hour, Lisa sat transfixed. She didn't try to solve anything. She just watched the patterns shift and change. Sometimes she would touch the screen, and new patterns would appear. What are you doing? Lisa jumped. Standing next to her was a being about her size, but with 4 arms and green skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. 2 large eyes blinked at her curiously. I'm looking at the puzzle, Lisa said. You're a child, said the green being. I'm a child too. My name is Trill. Adults don't let us work on the paradox. Lisa shrugged. I'm not working on it. I'm just looking. Trill moved closer. But you're touching it, making it change. I'm playing with it, Lisa explained. Like a game. Trill looked confused. The quantum entanglement paradox is not a game. It's the most serious problem in the galaxy. Maybe that's why no one can solve it, Lisa said. They're too serious. Just then, a tall blue being with 4 arms approached. It was Professor Zeta, who had presented yesterday. Young ones, what are you doing at this terminal? Professor Zeta asked. Their voice was surprisingly gentle. Trill bowed respectfully. The human was playing with the paradox data, Professor. Professor Zeta's 4 eyes widened in surprise. Playing. Show me. Nervously, Lisa touched the screen again, moving the patterns like she had been doing. The equations shifted and reformed. Interesting, said Professor Zeta. You're creating visual representations rather than working with the raw equations. More aliens gathered around, watching as Lisa moved shapes on the screen. She wasn't solving anything, just exploring how the patterns connected. Suddenly, a commotion erupted across the room. Dr. Reed had entered, looking frantically for his missing daughter. Lisa, he called, his face pale with worry. Then he saw the crowd gathered around the terminal, and his daughter at the center of it. What are you doing? He asked, pushing through the aliens. I told you to stay in our room. Lisa looked up guiltily. I was just looking at the puzzle, Dad. Dr. Reed grabbed her hand. I'm so sorry, he said to the aliens. She's just a child. She doesn't understand the importance of your work. As he pulled Lisa away, she glanced back at the terminal. The patterns still danced in her mind, connecting in ways she couldn't fully understand. Yet, little did Dr. Reed know that his daughter had already seen the paradox differently than anyone else in the galaxy. You embarrassed me today, Dr. Reed said as they returned to their quarters. These are the most important beings in the galaxy, and you were playing games on their equipment. Lisa looked down at her feet. I'm sorry, Dad, but the puzzle is so interesting. Dr. Reed sighed. The quantum entanglement paradox isn't a puzzle, Lisa. It's advanced science that even I don't fully understand. But it looks like string games, Lisa insisted. Like cat's cradle, but more complicated. Dr. Reed shook his head. Promise me you'll stay away from the terminals. You can come to the main hall tomorrow and sit quietly in the back. At least I can keep an eye on you there. The next day, Lisa sat in the last row of the Great Hall. One by one, brilliant scientists presented their attempts to solve the paradox. Most used complex mathematics that Lisa couldn't follow, but she watched the patterns in their holograms with interest. During a break, Trill found her again. My parents let me come watch too, the green alien child said. They think it's educational. Lisa smiled. Want to see something cool? She pulled a piece of string from her pocket, just a simple shoelace she had taken from her spare shoes. Quickly, her fingers moved, creating a pattern. This is cat's cradle, she explained, showing Trill the diamond shape between her hands. Now watch. Her fingers moved again, transforming the pattern. And this is Jacob's ladder. Trill's 4 hands reached out. Can I try? For the next half hour, the 2 children played with the string, creating different patterns. Other young aliens noticed and came over to watch. It's like the paradox, said a small furry being with large eyes. But simple. Exactly, Lisa said. That's what I've been thinking. When the presentations resumed, Lisa continued watching. But now, instead of just looking at the holograms, she played with her string under her seat, trying to match the patterns she saw. That evening, Dr. Reed was invited to dinner with some of the other scientists. To his surprise, Professor Zeta asked if his daughter could join them. Your child has an interesting perspective, Professor Zeta said. We'd like to hear more. At dinner, surrounded by the greatest minds in the galaxy, Lisa felt shy at first. But when they asked about her string games, she grew excited. It's all about how things connect, she explained, pulling out her shoelace again. When you change one part, other parts change too, but in ways you can predict. Professor Zeta nodded thoughtfully. The paradox works similarly. The equations are connected across multiple dimensions. Can I see them again? Lisa asked. To Dr. Reed's surprise, Professor Zeta agreed. After dinner, they went to a small room with a hologram projector. The paradox appeared in the air, equation swirling. This part, Lisa said, pointing to a section, looks like when the string twists here. She demonstrated with her hands. The aliens watched curiously as Lisa moved her string into different shapes, talking about connections and patterns. She wasn't using scientific terms or complex math, just simple observations about how things related to each other. The problem, Lisa said, is that everything is flat on the screen. But string games are 3-dimensional. You have to go under and over. Dr. Reed watched his daughter with growing amazement. She was seeing something in the paradox that these brilliant scientists weren't. Dad, Lisa said suddenly, can I have more string? And maybe some sticks or pencils. Professor Zeta immediately ordered materials brought to the room. Soon, Lisa had a pile of string, small rods, and clips. As the night grew late, Lisa built a strange, 3-dimensional model on the table. It didn't look impressive, just a bunch of string tied between sticks in a pattern that seemed random. What is that supposed to be? Asked one of the scientists. Lisa smiled. I'm not sure yet, but I think it's the beginning of the answer. Dr. Reed no longer felt embarrassed. Instead, he felt a strange mix of pride and wonder as he watched his daughter work in ways that the greatest minds in the galaxy had never considered. The 4th day of the summit brought more failed attempts. In the main hall, a team of crystal beings presented their solution. Their holograms spun with beautiful precision, equations flowing like water. But when they reached the final step, the familiar error appeared. Another failure, muttered Elder Gray. Lisa sat in the back row, working on her string model. Now it had grown larger, with colored strings connecting in complex patterns between small sticks. Trill sat beside her, handing her materials when she needed them. "What does this part mean?" Trill asked, pointing to a red string that looped around 3 others. "That's the part where the equations always break," Lisa explained. "Everyone tries to solve it directly, but I think we need to go around it somehow." As the crystal beings left the stage disappointed, Lisa had a sudden thought. She raised her hand. Elder Gray noticed the small human in the back. "Yes, the human child has a question." Dr. Reed turned in horror. His daughter was drawing attention to herself in front of the entire council. "It's not a question," Lisa said, standing up. Her voice was small in the large hall. "I just noticed something about their mistake." A murmur ran through the crowd. A child pointing out mistakes to the galaxy's greatest minds. "Let her speak," said Admiral Stone, leaning forward with interest. Lisa walked to the front, carrying her string model. It looked messy and childish next to the advanced technology around her. "The problem is that everyone tries to solve the equation in flat space," Lisa said. She held up her model. "But what if it's not flat? What if it's like a knot?" The hall fell silent. Lisa placed her model on the stage and pressed a small button she had attached to one of the sticks. The strings tightened, and suddenly the jumble of string took on a clear, organized shape. "In string games, sometimes you have to pull in the right direction to see the pattern," she explained. Professor Zeta stepped forward, examining the model carefully. "The child has created a 3-dimensional representation of the paradox equations." Lisa pointed to the red string. "This is where everyone gets stuck. But in my model, you can see it's not really a dead end. It just looks that way when you flatten it." She demonstrated by pressing the model flat, and sure enough, the red string appeared to hit a wall. But when she let it return to its 3-dimensional shape, the path continued clearly. "The math may still be wrong," Lisa admitted. "I don't know how to write equations, but I think the answer is about seeing the problem differently." Elder Gray approached slowly. His 6 eyes blinked in sequence as he studied the model. "This is unusual," he said carefully. Dr. Reed rushed to the stage. "I apologize for my daughter's interruption. She's just playing with strings, not solving real science." But Professor Zeta raised a hand. "Wait, there may be something here." The professor turned to their assistant. "Convert this physical model into mathematical terms. Let's see if the child's intuition holds true." For the next hour, the hall buzzed with activity. Scientists crowded around Lisa's model, taking measurements and notes. Computers worked to translate the physical structure into equations. Lisa sat on the edge of the stage, swinging her legs nervously. "I just wanted to help," she told her father. Dr. Reed put an arm around her shoulders. "You've certainly got their attention." Finally, Professor Zeta approached with a data pad. Their 4 eyes were wide with excitement. "The preliminary calculations suggest the model works," they announced. "When we apply the 3-dimensional approach to the equations, the error disappears." A cheer erupted from some of the younger scientists. Others looked skeptical. "We need more testing," cautioned Elder Gray. "But this is the first new approach in decades that hasn't immediately failed." Lisa beamed with pride. Her string game, something so simple a child could understand it, had done what thousands of complex equations could not. "Dad," she whispered, "I think I fixed the impossible problem." Dr. Reed hugged his daughter tightly. "I think you might have, Lisa. I think you might have." The next morning, the grand hall was packed tighter than ever before. News had spread quickly about the human child's strange model. Some came out of curiosity, others out of disbelief, and a few with hope that maybe, finally, the paradox would be solved. Elder Gray called the meeting to order. His voice was stern as he addressed the crowd. "Yesterday, we witnessed an unusual presentation," he said. "Today, we will properly test this new approach." Lisa sat between her father and Professor Zeta. She had spent the night improving her string model, making it stronger and clearer. Now it stood on a table at the center of the stage, looking out of place among the advanced technology. "The human child suggests that we have been working in the wrong dimensions." Elder Gray continued. A bold claim, indeed. Admiral Stone stepped forward. We have asked Professor Blue to test the model. Professor Blue has no connection to either the human delegation or to any competing team. Professor Blue was a tall, thin being with skin that shifted colors like oil on water. They were known as one of the most careful and precise scientists in the galaxy. I have spent the night studying this contraption, Professor Blue said, gesturing to Lisa's model. And I must admit, I was skeptical. Lisa looked down at her hands, feeling suddenly very small. However, Professor Blue continued, when I translated the physical model into mathematical terms, I found something remarkable. The professor activated a hologram. Complex equations filled the air. The child's model suggests that the quantum entanglement paradox is not, in fact, a paradox at all. It is simply a problem of perspective. A murmur ran through the crowd. By viewing the equations in 3 dimensions, plus a 4th dimension that the child represents with these colored strings, the supposed contradiction disappears. Dr. Reed squeezed Lisa's hand. You're doing great, he whispered. But not everyone was convinced. A large being with scales and sharp teeth stood up from the audience. This is absurd, they shouted. We are to believe that the greatest scientific minds in the galaxy were outsmarted by a human child with string. It must be a trick. Others joined in, their voices angry and dismissive. Elder Gray raised his hands for silence. We will proceed with practical testing, he declared. Professor Blue, please continue. Professor Blue nodded and pressed a button on their control panel. A small device in the center of the hall hummed to life. This is a miniature quantum field generator, they explained. If the child's model is correct, we should be able to create a stable entanglement pattern that defies our current understanding of physics. The crowd fell silent. Even the doubters watched intently as Professor Blue input the equations derived from Lisa's model. The device hummed louder. Lights flashed across its surface. Then suddenly, a small sphere of light appeared above it, pulsing with energy. Impossible, whispered someone in the crowd. Professor Blue checked their instruments, eyes wide with disbelief. The entanglement is stable, they announced, and it's behaving exactly as the model predicted. Cheers erupted from some sections of the hall, while others sat in stunned silence. Elder Gray approached Lisa slowly. All 6 of his eyes focused on her. Child, he said, his voice softer than before, how did you see what none of us could see? Lisa looked up at the ancient alien. I didn't know it was supposed to be impossible, she said simply. I just played with it until it made sense. Professor Zeta laughed, a sound like tinkling bells. Out of the mouths of babes, they said, though no one but Dr. Reed understood the Earth saying. Admiral Stone stepped forward, addressing the council. We must continue testing, of course. But if these results hold true, we may have our solution at last. Lisa smiled, watching the sphere of light pulse above the device. Her string game had changed everything. The impossible now seemed possible, and it had taken a child's eyes to see it. Dr. Reed put an arm around his daughter's shoulders, his face glowing with pride. You did it, Lisa, he whispered. You really did it. For the next 3 days, teams of scientists worked around the clock to test Lisa's model. They built larger versions of the quantum field generator. They checked and double-checked the math. They looked for flaws or mistakes. They found none. On the final day of the summit, Elder Gray called for a special meeting. The grand hall was silent as he stood to speak. For 51 years, he began, we have faced the quantum entanglement paradox. The greatest minds from every world have tried and failed to solve it. Yet now, a child from Earth, a planet we discovered only 3 years ago, has given us the answer. Lisa sat with her father in the front row. She wore her best clothes, though they were simple compared to the elaborate outfits of the alien delegates. The question that now faces us, Elder Gray continued, is why? Why could a human child see what our most brilliant scientists could not? Admiral Stone stepped forward. We have been studying human brains since we first contacted Earth. They are unusual in many ways. A hologram appeared, showing images of different brains, alien and human. Human brains form neural connections differently, Admiral Stone explained. Their planet has unique conditions: high gravity, thick atmosphere, intense competition for resources. These factors forced humans to develop flexible thinking. Professor Zeta joined them on stage. But there is more to it than just brain structure. Human children, in particular, think differently than adults. The professor turned to Lisa. "Child, please tell us how you approached the paradox." Lisa walked to the center of the stage. She felt nervous with so many eyes watching her, but her father's encouraging smile gave her courage. "I didn't try to solve it at first," she explained. "I just played with it. The grown-ups were so sure it was impossible that they made it harder than it was." She pulled out a simple piece of string from her pocket. "When I make a cat's cradle," she said, demonstrating with her fingers, "I don't think about math or physics. I just see patterns and possibilities." Lisa created a complex pattern with the string. "If I get stuck, I don't keep pushing the same way. I try something completely different." Professor Blue nodded thoughtfully. The child approached the problem without preconceptions. "We were limited by our knowledge, by what we thought was possible." "Exactly," Lisa said. "You all knew too much. I knew almost nothing about quantum physics, so I wasn't scared by the problem." A ripple of laughter spread through the hall. Elder Gray's 6 eyes blinked rapidly, the equivalent of a smile for his species. "From the mouths of children comes wisdom," he said. Admiral Stone addressed the council. "We propose a new approach to problem solving. We will create mixed teams that include not just experts, but also beginners, children, and thinkers from different fields." Professor Zeta added, "And we recommend that humanity be given special status within the Galactic Council. Their unique way of thinking may help us solve other challenges." The motion was put to a vote. The result was unanimous, a rare occurrence in Council history. Later, at a celebration dinner, many delegates came to speak with Lisa and Dr. Reed. "How does it feel to have solved the impossible?" asked Trill, who had become Lisa's good friend. Lisa shrugged. "It feels normal. It was just a puzzle." Dr. Reed laughed. "That's exactly the point, isn't it? To Lisa, it was just a puzzle. To everyone else, it was impossible." A group of scientists approached their table. They were from a distant system and had arrived late to the summit. "We heard about the human child," one said. "We came to see for ourselves." Their leader, a tall being with flowing tentacles, bowed to Lisa. "Our world has a problem, a disease that has resisted all cures. Would you consider visiting us, young human? Perhaps you could see what our doctors have missed." Dr. Reed started to protest, but Lisa spoke first. "I'm not a doctor," she said, "but I like puzzles, and I'd be happy to try." The impossible had become possible, and now doors were opening across the galaxy, all because one human child had the courage to play with a problem that the greatest minds had failed to solve. 6 months after the summit, Lisa stood with her father on the observation deck of the Galactic Council's newest ship. Through the large window, they watched Earth grow smaller as they moved away. "It still feels like a dream," Lisa said, watching her blue home planet. Dr. Reed smiled. "Well, it's very real. The first working faster-than-light drive, built using your model." The ship hummed quietly beneath their feet. It was called the Child's Play, named in honor of Lisa's approach to solving the paradox. It was the first of many ships that would use the new technology. Admiral Stone approached them on the deck. "We're ready for the first jump," he said. "We thought Lisa might want to give the command." Lisa's eyes widened. "Really? Me? It seems only right," Admiral Stone said. "Without you, we wouldn't be here." They walked to the bridge of the ship. Aliens of different species worked at control panels. Many smiled or nodded as Lisa entered. She was famous now across the galaxy. Captain Bright, a human who had been chosen to command the first flight, stood from her chair. "Welcome, Lisa. Would you like to see how your solution works in practice?" Lisa nodded eagerly. Captain Bright led her to a control panel where a 3D model, much like Lisa's string model, but made with advanced technology, glowed softly. "This is the navigation system," Captain Bright explained. "It uses your multi-dimensional approach to plot a course through space." Lisa touched the model gently. It responded to her fingers, shifting and changing just like her string game had done. "When you're ready," Captain Bright said, "just press the green button and say jump." Lisa looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. She pressed the button. "Jump," she said clearly. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the stars outside the window stretched into lines of light. Lisa felt a strange tickle in her stomach, and suddenly the view changed completely. A new star system appeared before them. "Jump successful," announced a crew member. "We've arrived at Alpha Centauri. Travel time, 2.3 seconds." Cheers erupted across the bridge. Lisa jumped up and down in excitement. "We did it," she cried. "We really did it." Admiral Stone smiled. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Thanks to you, the galaxy is now open to all species. No more isolation. No more limits." Later that day, a special ceremony was held in the ship's main hall. Representatives from 20 different worlds had come on this first journey. Elder Gray, who had traveled with them, stood at the center of the hall. In his hands, he held a medal, the Galactic Achievement Medal, the highest honor the Council could give. "Lisa of Earth," he announced, "you have changed the course of galactic history. Your achievement will be remembered for thousands of years." He placed the medal around Lisa's neck. It was heavy and shone with strange, beautiful lights. "You are the youngest recipient in the history of this award," Elder Gray continued. "And because of you, we are establishing a new program, the Young Minds Initiative. Children from all worlds will be invited to work on our greatest challenges." Trill, who had also come on the journey, clapped enthusiastically with all four hands. After the ceremony, Lisa stood with her father looking out at the stars of Alpha Centauri. "Dad," she said, "do you think there are other problems out there that grown-ups think are impossible?" Dr. Reed laughed. "Probably thousands of them." "Good," Lisa said with a smile, "because I have a lot of other games we could try." As the ship prepared for its return journey, news was already spreading across the galaxy. The greatest minds had failed, but one human child had cracked the impossible. And now, a new era of exploration and discovery had begun. In classrooms on planets circling distant stars, teachers told the story of Lisa and her string model. They encouraged their students, no matter their species, to think differently, to play with problems, and to never believe something was impossible just because everyone said it was. And somewhere in the vast universe, other children began looking at old problems with new eyes, inspired by a human girl who had changed everything with a simple piece of string.